Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about, and it's going to be a huge undertaking, we're talking about every single book I read in 2024, which is insane that we're already at the end of the year, but I say that every year. I did get to read a lot of books this year. I read 35, going on 36. I am in the middle of a couple books, so I feel like I could finish one of them by the time 2025 hits, which 2025 just sounds like a good year. I know 2024 was even, so it like felt good. The numbers felt good. But something about 2025, maybe because I was born in 1995, and then 2025, it feels solid. I have an insanely massive pile of books here, and we're just gonna go through them chronologically, and I'm gonna tell you what I thought about these books, if I recommend them to you, who I recommend them for, and we're just gonna get down to the nitty-gritty of it. I do have another video talking about my top 5 books of the year, so out of all of these, I picked 5 that I adore and were the best in my opinion, and you can watch that video over here. Hopefully I correctly linked that. Editing me, get it done, get it. And my reading challenge this year, I set myself to read 33 books, and I read 35 so far, hopefully 36. Really happy with that. I feel like as someone who makes book content online, that's not a lot, because there are people who this is their full-time job and they read a lot more than me. Even some people who have a full-time job and make book content still read a lot more books than me. Subscribe if you'd like to see more bookish content. With that being said, let's get into this video. The first book that I read in 2024 was Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This book honestly rocked my world. I had read ACOTAR before this, but Throne of Glass is just a whole new ballgame, and it definitely takes some commitment to get into the books that will sweep you off your feet. I think this one was the first one in that series that really started to do that for me. I can't say too much. If you haven't read Throne of Glass, I do recommend it. Just know that it's long. Not that the first books are bad by any means, they're just not as good as some of her other books. All of the world building and the character development that goes on and the plot that builds up for the end of this series to exist is incredible in my opinion. I haven't read a lot of fantasy. I just had such a great time reading this. It felt like watching a series that I adore but somehow better. I would rate Queen of Shadows 4.5 stars. And then I listened to the audiobook of Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I had never read an Ann Patchett book before this, and I was blown away by her writing. Her prose are beautiful. Some of my favorite quotes come from this book. I know a lot of people think this is a boring book, so if you don't like character-driven stories, then I wouldn't recommend it. You really have to be interested in a character-driven story, a story about the lives that our parents lead before we're born. Essentially, this is about our main character, who is a mother of 3 daughters. She is married and she lives on a cherry farm in northern Michigan. It is during 2020 and her daughters come home to the cherry farm for obvious reasons. It's dual timeline. The mother is telling the story to her 3 daughters of her relationship, fleeting relationship, one summer with a famous actor, Peter Duke, at a theater called Tom Lake. It's just, I don't know, such a wholesome story, and it felt so comforting while I was listening to it. Meryl Streep is incredible, we know. And I honestly loved the book so much that I think I'm gonna buy the physical copy, reread it, and annotate it. Highly recommend, 5-star read for me. If you don't like a slow-paced, character-driven book, then you won't like it, but I personally love it. And then I read Hereafter by Amy Lynn. This is a very short book. It is a memoir. It's devastating. It is about grief. Amy Lynn's husband suddenly died of, I believe it was a heart attack while he was on a run. And so she's just thrown into this reality that she had no idea was coming and has to cope with the loss of the one person that she loved the most. She reflects on that throughout this book. Most of the passages are just very short, raw snippets of her experience. It was beautiful. It was devastating. I personally have never lost anyone to that level. I've lost grandparents that I adore, but no one at this level in my life personally, thankfully. This was something that I am really glad that I read, and I do recommend it. I'm not gonna give it a rating because it doesn't feel right. And then apparently I was feeling very ambitious. I participated in the iconic tandem read. If you're not familiar with this, these 2 books take place during the same timeline. They just follow different characters. And when they originally came out, you would have had to go through Empire of Storms, which is very action-packed. Lots of things are happening, lots of plot development, and you get to a huge cliffhanger at the end. And then after that, Tower of Dawn was released, which takes place during the same timeline. So you don't get to dive into the resolution of what this cliffhanger was for a whole nother book. And this book also follows a character that a lot of people don't like. I, however, do end up liking this character. So I decided to do the tandem read, which is where you read a couple chapters of this and that. There's guides online. It's daunting, but it's so fun. I loved both of these books equally for different reasons. Both of them are 5-star reads for me. The character development, the action, the world building. I adore these books so much. Then I hopped into my thriller era and I picked up Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This is a book of the month pick. Honestly, you'll see a lot of book of the month picks in my reading just because I do make content for them. So I do luckily get gifted books from them. So I tend to read them. This was honestly probably a 4-star read for me. This was so fun. I feel like the podcast trope is really well done in this book. This is about a woman who, when she was younger in her hometown, her best friend was found murdered, her best friend was found murdered, and she was found walking the streets that night with her friend's DNA on her. So everyone thinks that she murdered her. She doesn't even know if she murdered her. Years later, she comes back to celebrate her grandma's 80th birthday, and she also meets this man who hosts the podcast Listen for the Lie that is investigating essentially this case. It was super gripping, really fast paced. I guess I'm naive, I don't know. And I think I'm gonna be able to guess who the killer is every single time, and I rarely get it right. Is it surprising who it is? To me, yes. To you, I guess you'll have to find out. Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. Well, there were aspects of this book that I really liked and it did interest me. The writing itself just kind of threw me for one. I felt a little bit irritated throughout the book. I don't know, it wasn't my favorite read. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I can barely remember the plot of it. I can only remember some things that I disliked. And I don't like to talk poorly about books because this man put a lot of work into this. But there were some things that personally I didn't like, and the writing kind of threw me off of the plot and the story. So it made me less interested in what was going on and more focused on these little nuances that weren't really relevant to the story. Basically, 2 people have experienced some sort of loss that has to do with someone murdering their loved ones, and they come together and they basically make an agreement of like, I will kill the person who made your life hell if you kill the person that did this to me so that we won't be caught. A whole mystery starts unraveling and it's chaotic, it's crazy. There's the classic detective involved. He has chronic back pain, which is mentioned a ton of times, and I thought that it was gonna come up in the end where like his back was gonna give out before he caught the suspect. Yeah, 3 stars. I don't know if I would recommend it. It was fun. You can decide for yourself. We're all adults here. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I adore this book. It's historical fiction. It is a fictionalized account of the people in Shakespeare's life. It's about his wife, his children, son, Hamnet, and Shakespeare is never explicitly mentioned in this. Obviously, he's in the story in parts because it's his family, but the focus is really on the people whose stories are kind of hidden in the shadow of Shakespeare's fame. His wife, for example, she is incredible. Obviously, this is fictionalized. Could be true, could be not true. Who knows? She's iconic. Maggie O'Farrell's writing, iconic, atmospheric. It feels like a spring morning when you read this. Her prose are beautiful. It's about grief, it's about loss, it's about motherhood, it's about strong women. I highly recommend this book. It's a great historical fiction novel. If you're interested in strong women, reading an emotional story, historical fiction, Shakespeare, I think you would love, love, love this book. Then I finally picked up Happy Place by Emily Henry. And I am not a romance lover of any sort, but I love Emily Henry. Emily Henry's romances read more like literary fiction to me, and she also has a huge emphasis on atmosphere and setting, and I think that's really what shines through her books for me and makes them really enjoyable, and Happy Place was no exception. I loved the lake house vibes, and the romance was very sweet. It's kind of second chance romance. Essentially, our main character is pretending to not be broken up with her fiance, even though they are broken up, because they're going on a trip with all of their friends that they go to annually, and essentially they're just saving face, pretending to be together in front of all of their friends, and then obviously because of that there's kind of a second chance aspect that happens. I would give it 4 stars. Then I was feeling bold and I wanted to pick up more romance because I was like, well, if I like Happy Place, then maybe I like other romance. Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, and this was my first Abby Jimenez book ever, and now I know that I should have read her other books before picking up this one. I really enjoyed this. People talk about how emotional it was, and I will say, yes, there were emotional parts, but I've also read more emotional books than this, so to me it didn't feel devastating like a lot of people felt. We have two main characters and they both feel like they are love's good luck charm, so they feel like everyone they date, once they dump them, then that person they dated will then find the love of their life. And they end up meeting through a Reddit thread about this and deciding, well, let's try and date each other to cancel out this curse, essentially. One of our main characters, she's a traveling nurse, I believe, and she has a really complicated relationship with her mother, which kind of adds some depth to this and more character development than your average romance novel. And it was really fun. I loved the friendship between our female main character and her best friend. The banter between these two main characters was really fun to read as well. And I read How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong, and I remember feeling underwhelmed by this book. It was, again, lighthearted, easy to get through, but the romance between the two characters felt really stale. It didn't feel believable, and for that, I'm giving it 3 stars. Apparently, Yulin Kwong is actually a screenwriter from my understanding, so that might be part of it. It was a really fun concept. Main character, she works in the film industry, and the love interest is someone that she is kind of enemies with, in a sense. He essentially accidentally killed her sister. So I guess, you know, that's believable enemies material. And they end up being on the same project together. And so they end up going from kind of enemies to lovers. However, once they were interested in each other, it just wasn't believable, and their love was just kind of stale to me, and I didn't love it. There wasn't a lot of atmosphere in this book. Again, I think the author is a screenwriter, so the fact that there wasn't a ton of focus on setting and atmosphere, that's something that's really important to me in a book. So I just felt like I didn't love it because of that. But again, maybe you might love it, so don't totally check it off your list if I say that I didn't give it a high rating. Okay, and then I read How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin, and I raved about this on my Instagram. This was such a fun, cozy mystery. It is about a girl whose great aunt is very wealthy. She ends up getting an invite to her great aunt's mansion, and she hasn't even met her great aunt. And when she goes, her great aunt actually gets, and long story short, her great aunt has been expecting to be murdered basically her whole life ever since she got this fortune. So it's dual timeline from when her aunt was younger and then when our main character is discovering that her aunt was murdered and kind of putting the pieces together. It was such a fun read. Highly recommend. I know that Kristen Perrin is coming out with another book in this series soon, and I cannot wait to read it. I actually gave my copy of this book to my grandma because I thought she loves murder mysteries, that kind of thing, so I thought she would enjoy it. I adore this book, 5 stars. And then I picked up another Emily Henry. I picked up Funny Story upon its release. This book very much reminded me of New Girl. I love the vibes. Honestly, 5 stars. I had such a good time reading it. I don't have any intelligent, intellectual thoughts to say about it other than it was a really fun romance book. The setting was great. It feels like New Girl, like Nick and Jess relationship vibes. The love interest definitely wasn't who I thought because he was so Nick-esque, if you know what I mean. Just kind of like messy, not an aspirational person in the beginning. And then I am gonna pass away because my back is hurting. And then I read Days at the Murasaki Bookshop. This is a very short read. It's translated from Japanese into English, and it is about a girl who is going through a breakup and just some general life struggles. So she ends up moving in with her uncle who owns the Murasaki Bookshop, and it's just kind of about her and her uncle and his relationship with her aunt that's very strange, and just kind of her life of like getting back on her feet. It's very cozy, and I would rate it 3.5 to 4 stars. I think I liked it more while I was reading it, but now that I've had a lot of time to reflect, I don't think about it that much. I read Kingdom of Ash, and I won't spend too long on this, but when you get to the end of this series, it totally tears you up. There's one part in this that feels so illegal for Sarah J. Maas to have written. It's not fair. It's not right. But I give this book 5 stars. It is so long. And then I guess I was feeling insane, and I was like, you know what, let's continue with the fantasy train. Let's pick up Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book I don't have the first copy. This was my first Brandon Sanderson that I've ever read, and it's very much a dude book. I'm just gonna put that out there. There's no romance. There's like crumbs of romance, which is fine. I don't need romance in every single one of my books. I think the magic system was super interesting and very well done. I did cry when one of the characters, something bad happened to them. And I had a good time reading it. Do I think I'll read all of Brandon Sanderson's other books? Maybe not, because I don't read a ton of fantasy. And it just felt like the characters didn't have a ton of depth to them. And maybe that's just because it was written from a male's perspective. I'm not sure. But I did really enjoy it, and I would give it 4.5 stars. I think the girlies can read Mistborn and enjoy it. I do want to read the rest of the series though. I just don't know if I'll read all of his other works. Maybe that's a bad idea and I should read more of his work. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of Brandon Sanderson. I know he's a great writer. I'm not trying to argue that at all. I don't know if it's for me necessarily. And that's just epic fantasy in general. I think I lean more romantasy. Hello, it is now dark because my camera died and I had to charge it because I have convinced myself that I don't need a backup battery when I do in fact need a backup battery. So then after reading Mistborn, I was interested in some more translated Japanese fiction, and I read Diary of a Void by Emi Yagi. This was a very interesting book. I have a hard time rating it, to be honest. It's essentially about a woman working in the corporate world in Japan, and she decides to pretend to be pregnant in order to get out of doing things like bringing her coworkers coffee, working overtime, things that probably shouldn't be happening to her in the first place, but she uses this pregnancy to get out of them. And the whole time you're thinking, okay, like what's gonna happen when she's supposed to be showing? She goes down a rabbit hole and you almost feel like she starts to believe her own lie. It's kind of a strange novel, but it was short. It was interesting. I think the main point of it was making commentary on the work culture in Japan and how women are treated. But as a book, and not knowing that it was gonna be a kind of political commentary going into it, I was a little bit confused, and the ending didn't feel like a good resolution. But I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I never go lower than 3 stars, it seems. I have a hard time though, because I know that most books, even if I didn't like them, somebody will like them, and it's all just opinions, you know? And then I read God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about this. Watch my other videos because I have talked about this book a lot. If you want something that is a summer camp nostalgia, a really well-written mystery thriller book, it's long, but it feels short, it's fast-paced, the ending will confuse you, or you won't be able to predict the ending, and it just is like the perfect summer read but isn't light and frivolous. Oh, if you're looking for a thriller but you find sometimes the writing in thrillers leaves something to be desired, then I highly recommend God of the Woods because the writing is really well done. I cannot recommend it enough. 5 stars. Then I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a young adult book. My boyfriend's mother actually recommended it to me. She's a librarian and it's one of her favorite books, and I was a little hesitant to read it at first because I don't really enjoy YA at all, but this book was so precious. It was so adorable. I had the best time reading it. It is essentially about a baby who is left into the woods because in this society they feel the need to sacrifice a child and give the child to the witch in the woods, and they just leave this baby in a field. The witch in the woods, however, is confused as to why they're leaving babies. So she goes and she rescues these babies, and then she finds homes for them. However, when she rescues this particular baby, she accidentally feeds her the moon, and this baby becomes powerful, and so she keeps the baby in her care, and it's kind of found family. It's just a really heartwarming novel. I don't want to say too much else other than I think everybody should read it, even if you're not sure that you like YA, because I wasn't sure that I liked YA and I loved this book. And then I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is about a 70-year-old woman. She is in retirement, but she decides to take up a job at the local aquarium for something to do. She is part of a little women's group in her area called the Nitwits. It's very cute. And she ends up befriending this octopus who actually is sentient. So you get the woman's perspective and then the octopus's perspective. I really enjoyed reading this. However, I haven't thought about it much since. I would give it 4 stars. Then I was feeling crazy and I got a Kindle and I decided to explore Kindle Unlimited, and I was also feeling wild in the sense that I wanted to read something that felt like Vampire Diaries or Pretty Little Liars. So I looked that up on TikTok and I saw a video that recommended the series The Marionettes by Katie Wismer, and I read the first 2 books in the series. I mean, I read the second book, so that tells you something. That tells you that I was invested enough to continue the series. Were they well done? No. No. I had a fun time reading them. However, while I was reading them, I knew that the writing could use some work. It felt like it was an earlier draft of a book. It was a fun story. It's kind of vampires, witches. There's a school setting, kind of dark academia, enemies to lovers situation. But I would rate these probably 2.5 stars. Then I read The Unmaking of June Farrow. Decided to go for a classic, popular TikTok read, and it did not disappoint. The Unmaking of June Farrow is a lovely book. There's this curse that the Farrow women have where they go crazy past a certain age. Then you discover that they're not actually going crazy. There's something really crazy going on. And it's a whole mystery that unravels. And also the love story in this book had me screaming. There wasn't a lot of spice or romance, but the little bit of romance that happens in this book I thought was just the most touching thing, and I wanted that man for myself. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, can I be June Farrow, please? I want to live in this reality. Anyway, I would rate that 4.5 stars, 4.75. I don't think it's my favorite book of all time, but it was amazing and I cried at the end. I loved it. I do recommend. And then I picked up Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I DNF'd this one. I liked it in the beginning. It went a direction that I wasn't thinking it was gonna go, and it kind of encompasses a lot of fairy tales. In the beginning, it was giving very much like Stranger Things vibe, or like haunted house at the end of the road kind of vibe, weird old man neighbor vibe. You know what I'm talking about, like that classic. There's a movie I'm thinking of that's a cartoon, and the old man is like, get off my lawn. It's very much like that vibe in the beginning. But then the old man dies and then it just like takes a turn. DNF'd for now, but there's a chance that I will come back to it. Then I picked up One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This was one that I had actually DNF'd last year and decided to revisit because everybody was like, this book is so good. And I enjoyed it. I think that by the end of it, the way that the first book wraps up, or rather doesn't wrap up, it just kind of left me feeling empty inside and I didn't really want to pick up the next one. I think that the magic system was really interesting. The magic system is these cards that you possess and then you have specific powers. And I liked the romance. It wasn't anything crazy. I don't know. People really, really love this series, and maybe it's just not for me. I'm curious what you guys think. Does it get better in the second book? Should I pick up the second book? I would give the first book 3.75 stars. You guys could definitely influence me on this though, so let me know in the comments. And then I read The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This one was one that I picked up totally based on the cover because I thought it was so cute. I don't have my copy because well, the truth is I wanted to loan it to my mom, so I mailed it to her and the package got stolen out of her mailbox. So this is just a cozy fantasy. It is about a librarian who lives in the city, and she's from a small town on an island originally, and then there's political unrest in the city and she decides to save a bunch of the library books. Gets on a boat with her BFF, a talking plant named Kaz. They get on a boat and they go back to her hometown and they move into her old home that is completely overgrown. They meet this large man named Laren who becomes a love interest, and she befriends all the townspeople, basically realizes that the island is in disrepair and people are struggling, and she opens a spell shop essentially under the disguise of it being a jam store because it is illegal to use magic in this time period. It's just a really, really wholesome fantasy story. It's a story of friendship. It is a story of love. It's a romance, and it was just a really, really good read. I would give it 4.5 stars. Then I read The Secret History, or rather finished The Secret History because I was halfway through it and had been for the past year or so. Wow, did that book rock my world. By the end, I was like, what in the heck did I just read? That was really traumatic and very well written, and so many references and things that were totally over my head. It made me feel extremely stupid and that I need to gather a lot more knowledge in my lifetime. 4.5 stars. I had a good time reading The Secret History. It is popular for a reason. I get the hype. The thing that I loved most about it was definitely the atmosphere and the feeling of reading it. And what I found interesting is that by the end of it, I hated a lot of the characters, but when I finished the book, I actually missed the characters and they almost felt like they were real people in my life, and that's a testament to Donna Tartt's writing. And then I immediately jumped into The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I wanted this to be a lot more atmospheric than it was. However, the storyline, it is about a circus, the Night Circus, that is essentially a circus that will just pop up in any city at any time and put on a circus at night, and you go in and it's just this insane circus. It's actually magical. What I liked most about this book was the circus itself. I thought it was so awesome. I'd never read anything like that. It felt like the kind of circus that you dream up when you're a child. I wish it existed in real life. I love The Night Circus. The book itself, I just felt a disconnect from the characters, and so that's why it's only a 3.75 to 4-star read for me. And then I read Bunny, which I will keep this brief because I've talked about Bunny a lot. This is magical realism, this is fantasy, this is horror. It's by Mona Awad. Her writing in this is so captivating, so creative. Feels like a fever dream. And if you want a book that feels like a fever dream and leaves you confused and also makes you laugh and also grosses you out, then I think you'll like this. Then I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I don't need to say much. This is a classic. Sylvia Plath is an incredible writer, was an incredible writer, and it's a sad book. Now I own the unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath and I will be reading them. Then I read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I had not read a T. Kingfisher novel ever. This is a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher, and wow. This book was dark, this was scary, it was gross, it was atmospheric, it was amazing, it was short, it was 5 stars. I love this book. It was so awesome. I highly recommend reading it. If you want to save it for any season, save it for the autumn, specifically Halloween time or even early autumn. Like, it is amazing. I read it in November. I ate it up. I could not put it down. It's well written. And I feel like I learned a lot about just like mushrooms and like random words and stuff in it. Then I read The Frozen River on my flight to Japan. It's about feminism. It's also a murder mystery. It's set in, I think, the 1700s, and it's a very wintry read. I would give it 4 stars. It's kind of devastating in the sense that just the way women were treated back then and are still sometimes treated, but the things they had to endure and how scary it was to just exist in the world as a woman and have men who were willing to go to extreme lengths to get what they wanted from you. I do recommend this book, but it is heavy. I was going into it thinking it was going to be kind of just like a murder mystery thriller. I tend to not read the back of books these days, which is stupid. The relationship between our main character and her husband, I adore their relationship. That was, as much as I hated the men in this book and the relationships between men and women, the relationship between the husband and wife was so grounding, and it was such a light among all of the darkness that was happening in the book. The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Amy Carter. This was a fun, cozy mystery / romance. It's Knives Out, but make it romance. It is Agatha Christie vibes. It's all the things that you need. And I read it during the Christmas season, obviously, and I would give it 4.5 stars. I'm reserving my 5 stars for, you know, really iconic books. This one is amazing and it's gained so much popularity since its release, and I'm so happy because it honestly deserves it. This was really, really, really fun to read. The only thing that I didn't love about it was the enemies to lovers portion, and like some of the romantic bits felt a bit cheesy, but other than that. And then I read Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. I didn't really love this book. I don't really like romance. You might like it if you like romance and you want a Christmas rom-com situation, but I'm not even gonna rate it because I just didn't connect with it. And then lastly, I read the best book I've read all year, maybe, I don't know. Winter Garden, 5 million stars, 6 stars. I love this book. It's World War II Russia. It's a relationship between 2 sisters and their cold, disapproving mother. It's so devastating. You will cry your eyes out, you will sob. but you need to read it. I loved it. You can hear me talk more about it in my top 5 books of 2024 video, but those are all the books that I read this year so far, unless I finish the one I'm reading right now. I am so grateful for all of you guys who have been watching my videos, and I would love to hear what your favorite books of 2024 were in the comments below, or any recommendations that you have for me, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye!